1. When I was in 6th grade, I woke up one day with 4 very small holes on my upper right thigh. It looked like the skin had been cut out in perfect tiny circles, yet there was no blood. The circles were in a straight line and across my thigh horizontally, no more than 6 inches wide completely. I also felt very tired and couldn't remember what I had dreamt, which is weird for me, since I pretty much remember every dream I have every night. I put band-aids on them and went to school as usual. The next morning, I wake up and there are 3 new holes, right above the previous 4. I woke up once again very tired and drowsy, and was now weirded out by how symmetrical everything was that I showed my mom, who said it was most likely ant or spider bites. Next morning, 2 more holes above the previous 3, and the morning after that, 1. This is when I was seriously scared, since the holes now formed a triangle that pointed to my knee, and they weren't scabbing over. I was so tired and confused, and was scared to go to bed, so I stayed up really late, but woke up the next morning, not even knowing when I had fallen to sleep, only dark, and then morning. When I did wake up, I was suddenly very alert, and when I threw my blanket off my legs, I found all the holes completely gone. No scabbing or scarring, or any trace of the circles on my thigh. I showed my mum and she just brushed it off as if they'd healed like any other cut. I'm honestly not sure if this is related, but I do feel like there is a correlation. After this, I couldn't really comprehend math anymore. I had excelled at math all my life, but after this incident, it was like numbers had no meaning to me, and I couldn't figure out simple equations. I went to an advanced school and had been learning algebra and geometry, and was doing great, but then it was like, poof, all my math knowledge and comprehension was gone. To this day, I can't even do simple addition problems without double-checking them. 2. My father would tell me this story repeatedly, with such a strange look on his face I never knew if it was a myth, but when I asked my grandmother about it, she remembers it clear as day as well. My grandmother was just known as Mother back then, having 3 children, one being my future father. They were living out in the middle of nowhere in Michigan, lost in the trees and tranquility. Preparing for a weekend without the kids, her husband, my grandfather, was dropping the kids off with family. When he returned, the house was dark, that creepy dark where everything feels eerie, and you feel alone. They had a fine evening despite his ill-minded thoughts, and they didn't have any problems falling asleep. They didn't have any trouble waking up either, as they were woken by bright flashes through the tiny solo window in their room. They quickly made their way to the kitchen, where they opened the back door to see what was causing the bright light. My grandfather, wanting to be brave, told his wife to step back, and as he opened the back door more bright colours appeared, an array of colours neatly set in a weird-shaped circle, floating just right above the ground. As his eyes adjusted to the oddly, inhumanly bright colours flashing abruptly, he noticed they were coming from some sort of misshaped aircraft, almost shaped like a football, just a little more round, but still resembling the bare shape of a deformed football. He couldn't tell what colour, nonetheless the material it was made out of due to the bright flashing colours coming from the odd aircraft. It was just small enough to fit in between the patch of trees, but large enough a family could easily fit in. He noticed something walking towards him on 2 legs, 2 feet, just like a human. Though seemed to be nude, it didn't seem to have genitalia from what he saw, but everything else was very human-like. The head was elongated, eyes bulged, but could probably pass as a deformed human. The creature walked up to him and brought his hand out like a wave, but instead of moving back and forth making a waving motion, his hand was still, as if waiting for a high five. Not knowing what to do, my grandfather stood still until he noticed my grandmother had joined him outside, and is witnessing this as well. Seeing her face made him realize they weren't dreaming. Once the strange, human-like creature put his hand down, another one of their kind appeared, walking out onto the same platform his accomplice was standing upon, protruding out of the aircraft. He was holding what seemed to be some sort of flat substance. The original creature took it and began offering it to my grandparents. Nervously, my grandfather reached for it, but the creature retracted and reached out to my grandmother instead. She looked at her husband, weary if she should accept their mystery gift, but finally did. It seemed to be squishy, round, like a pancake but larger. The creatures brought out another pancake substance for themselves and began eating it. They looked at my grandparents, waiting for them to eat as well. Without thinking, they each tore a piece off and ate it, realizing it must have been made of some type of wheat or grain, but not one they've seen here on Earth, A different, odd grain from wherever the hell these creatures were from. After they saw my grandparents try their pancake, they had another still wave and retreated into the aircraft. The platform disappeared with them, and the flashing colours started to fade in the sky. I have always asked, what did they do with the pancake? Did they give it to the government? Report it at all? Both my dad and grandmother said back then it would have been hard to report something without everyone thinking they were crazy. I never got to meet my grandfather to get his side of the story, but I have this weird gut feeling they weren't telling a myth. 3. Here are the results of my past polygraph test. I had taken this polygraph because I thought my then fiancée should know what she would be getting into. I know saying you're an abductee sounds crazy. It is something I don't want to talk about because of the eye roll factor. So it was terribly nerve-wracking to admit this secret part of my life with her. Will she think I'm nuts? Crazy? Delusional? Will she still marry me? Which she did. She was owed the truth, because I had a feeling she would be taken too, as an ex-girlfriend of mine had been abducted when we started living together. I had lived with an ex that started to have these unsettling dreams that were real. She was awake, in her bed. She felt she was not dreaming, but when she saw this being at the foot of her bed, glowing, she didn't know what to make of it. Even when she was describing her experiences, I knew what had happened, but still kept quiet. Like I said, talking about this is not easy, because of how crazy it sounds. Later, I opened up about my experiences. I could tell she didn't know what to make of it. Then, one night, we were both taken. Having these experiences happen to you when you're alone is one thing, but to have someone else see and experience what you have, well, that is hard to ignore anymore. Though she didn't think they were aliens. Her take was that they were demons, or angels. She was not the only witness. A few years back I found out my sibling had the same experiences. I always thought she might have. For some reason the ETs like to keep the abductions in the same bloodline. When it had come out, I recall my mum's mouth dropping in shock. My sibling had told my mum in confidentiality, but as my mum said, she didn't know what to make of it. However, when I came out, she had said she knew something happened because it came from my mouth. My sibling and I recall seeing the greys, those big, black eyes. The eyes are always striking. We recalled the same instances during childhood. For example, she heard them in the hallway the night before. In the morning she came to check on me. I remember being ultra embarrassed because I was naked. Apparently the ETs forget to put my underwear back on. The ETs made small mistakes like that, forgetting to put your underwear back on, or placing you in bed the opposite way, or placing you on the couch instead of your bed, all of which had happened to me. As for my now wife, she had her first experience a couple years after we married. She recalled seeing a bright light shine in through the bedroom door. A little dot red light she could not identify was just inside, right of the bedroom door, and a lizard-looking creature to the right of the bed. She remembers being paralysed, floated out of her bed, then it goes blank from there. Being abducted is terrifying. I wish this had never happened to me. I wish I had the luxury to claim that others were crazy. I don't know why they're here or what they plan to do, but I have a feeling it's in their interest, not ours. 4. I wasn't abducted from what I remember, but I used to have a crippling fear of an alien invasion when I was a kid. I used to watch the skies from my window like a hawk each night, looking for the smallest strange thing to pop up. I always had an interest in the night sky ever since I was 4 or 5, and walking home with my aunt one night when we saw a large, misshapen white sphere in the sky. It was like the moon, but smaller, more bright and lumpy, and the actual moon was just a few feet away from it. I was really young, and even with my generally vivid memory, it is still very blurry. But this sticks out in my mind, because I remember my aunt commenting on how weird it was, and rushing us home. Later in my life, early high school, I was walking home from a friend's house, and looked up to marvel at the stars, when I saw this large, blue orb among the smaller white specks. I remember my first thought was, it's finally happening. I'm finally seeing something fucked up in the sky. But right as I was finishing that thought, the orb blew up in a cosmic explosion of blue and green, in a way I can only describe as something you'd see on Star Trek. I immediately started running home, and I was a chubby teen, so I didn't run for nothing. I burst into my front door, absolutely bawling my eyes out, screaming about the alien invasion I've always feared was finally among us. I never heard anything about it after that night. Nothing on the news, and no one in my area ever mentions seeing it when I bring it up. Then, last year, I went camping out in the Crown Lands in Muskoka, and if you've ever been in a place with very little light pollution, you know how stunning the sky can be. I was down by the water, probably just after midnight, and was gazing up at the stars when I saw one speedy little white light moving straight across the sky. The place I was camping in wasn't a stranger to planes flying overhead, so I wasn't immediately taken aback, although I was wondering why there was no noise and no other lights like the other planes had. Not to mention it was going rather fast and seemed much higher than a plane would be. I was with my friend at the time, and jokingly raised my flashlight to the sky and turned it on and off, signalling whatever was up there. The second I did this, the light took an incredibly sharp right turn and began coming back the way I came. I stress every time I tell this story that this sharp turn was faster than any plane or helicopter could accomplish. I slammed my flashlight at my side upon this sight and demanded my friend and I go back to our tent. She agreed, having also seen what I'd seen and been unnerved. Funnily enough, about a month later I was watching an alien video on YouTube and came across a Canadian politician who stepped down and began focusing on UFOs after he had experienced exactly what I had. In the same place, Muskoka. I still get nervous when I look up at the night sky nowadays. 5. Back in January of this year, 2018, I was back at my parents' home while they were out of town. It was nice to relax in a big house by myself, so that night I planned on relaxing in the hot tub outside. I'm not sure if many of you are familiar with pool equipment, but my system can be controlled by this wireless handheld controller. Press a button and the jets come on, the fountains, etc. The remote usually sits outside by the pool, so it doesn't disconnect. I kept going back and forth from the house to the remote, checking on the temperature. It was taking a longer time than usual to heat up because of the cold weather. So this is the part where I started to notice something I have never felt before in my life. Going back and forth from inside to outside, I noticed that every time I went outside, I got this very eerie feeling. The feeling you get when you hear a noise late at night by yourself. The feeling you get walking down a dark street and sense someone behind you. The feeling you get when you're terrified. I would turn my head and listen, because usually when I get that gut feeling that something isn't right, something is not fucking right. It sent chills down my spine so much I could feel the hair on top of my head stand up like a buzz cut. I blew this off because maybe I was just overreacting and thinking too much of it. I have always been spiritual in nature, but never really searched for the answers. I've always felt how energy is constant and doesn't die. I felt this weird energy around me, so to speak, that I have never felt before, and it scared me. So I proceeded to move on with my night. The hot tub was finally done heating, and I was cold. I grabbed a bottle of water and a cigarette, along with my towel and the remote. I sat these items next to me on the chair next to the hot tub. Once I got in, I sparked my Joe and looked up into the sky. It was a clear, cold, crisp night. I heard police sirens in the distance, and thought to myself, what a world we live in. The next thing I remember is the noise. I was just about done with my cigarette when I felt this pulsing, humming noise all over my body. It was like bass from a song, but more metallic in nature. It was thumping, but humming, and you could feel it in your bones. I looked around frantically to see where it was coming from, but it felt like it was everywhere. Once again I felt that utter fear and chill down my spine, and my eyes locked on to what I believe was an otherworldly being. About 100 yards away, and maybe 100 yards in the air across the lake on the tree line, was a dull shroud of light. Slightly orange, but it seemed to have every colour. It wasn't really a colour I've seen, more of just light itself. I became frozen in place, and could not move or make a sound. My vision immediately started to tunnel, and all I could see was this craft hovering above the trees, just chilling there. To best describe what it looked like, I would say if you look at a light from a distance and take the source of that light away, but keep the light around it, is what it looked like. Just a shroud of light with no source. I noticed my awareness of things around me was heightened, like I was in a higher state of consciousness. I remember saying, "It's within the light," while staring at whatever it was. I've never said that before in my life. It just popped into my head, and I said it aloud. After that, I broke out of the tunnel vision and started thinking, this isn't real, I'm seeing things, all that kind of thing. I couldn't believe it. I turned around to face the opposite side of where this thing was, and turned back around and it was still there. The next thing I remember is a gust of wind, which somehow opened and then closed the iron gates I have on each side of my house at the exact same time. It rattled the whole fence along my backyard. I was so scared, but I couldn't move. I'm not entirely sure what happened next, because it's all in fragments. But after the gates I remember kind of waking back up, like coming out of it, still in the hot tub. But as soon as that happened, the hot tub started draining water like gallons a second, and the remote was on the chair next to me. At this point I was done. I ran inside as fast as I could. I was shaking like I had just seen a murder. I went back inside and grabbed my phone. I could barely hold it still, but I looked at the clock, and I had lost roughly 45 minutes of time when I had been in the hot tub for 5 to 10 minutes when the event started. It all happened so fast that I didn't know what really happened until I sat down. I'm not sure what I witnessed that night, but I will say whatever it was had an effect on my perception of time and consciousness. I could feel things I have never felt, and saw things I have never seen. I hope one day we figure out what we should know about this world, because after this experience I will say that this world is not just us on a physical plane. There is more to the universe as a whole than we think. I know this post is extremely long, but I couldn't leave any details out. This is how I experienced it, so I wanted you all to do the same. And the stories end there. You've been listening to Frontier Fiction. If you enjoyed the content, please like, subscribe, and comment about any alien experiences you might have had. And remember, in the depths of space, there's always another story to be told.